All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending. So thanks for joining us and welcome to the fifth and final session of the FPSA Fall Operations Conference. My name is Brian Shoup. I'm the Director of Process and Packaging for Gray Solutions, and I'm also the Chairman of the FPSA Food Safety Network. Today's session is entitled Disaster Prevention and Contingency Planning for Operations, where we'll cover how to safeguard your operations against unforeseen events by examining the types of events and typical causes, preparation for disasters, prevention of disasters, managing disasters, and some general lessons learned and best practices. So I'm excited to introduce you all to Dan Schmitz, who's Director of Operations for Commercial Food Sanitation. I'll allow Dan to further introduce himself in a moment. But first, a quick housekeeping item. We want this to be interactive, so if you haven't been to one of these yet, please use the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen to type in any questions you may have. We'll monitor these throughout the presentation and aim to ask them at the most opportune time. So with that, I'd like to get started by introducing our speaker for today, Mr. Dan Schmitz. Give a warm virtual round of applause, please.
Thank you, Brian. As introduced, I'm Dan Schmitz, Director of Operations for Commercial Food Sanitation. Just a little bit of background about myself. I've been with in the food industry for 29 years. The experiences I have in the food industry have been in operations, food safety, quality, sanitation, many plant roles, many corporate roles, and kind of everything in between over those 29 years. Currently in commercial food sanitation, running the day-to-day operations for North America, Mexico, Australia, and a couple other spots. So thank you very much for FPSA asking for me to come talk today. I really appreciate the opportunity. And let's get started, shall we? So first, a little bit of introduction about, give background about the company that I'm with so you understand some of the context. We're with Commercial Food Sanitation. We are owned by Interlocks, the modular plastic melting company. And we do act as an independent company with Interlocks. Of course, there are things that we do that we work with Interlocks on. And we, of course, work with the food industry in a wide variety of things. Our main work that we do is really focused on two main buckets. We do consulting and food safety, sanitation, and hygienic design. And we also do training on those topics with our overall goal of providing those real world solutions to your problems with a very experienced crew of people. We are also global in nature. So we have offices in these locations and we can provide support throughout the globe. So as we mentioned before, the agenda is going to be talking about a little bit of background on what we're going to talk about, then preparation, prevention, managing, and some lessons learned. And of course, we'll have an opportunity for some questions and some answers. So let's get started into the details. So first of all, with the background, wanted to kind of frame up a little bit about what we're talking about because the topic of disaster and contingency planning, for operations is pretty broad. And there's a lot of different things that a disaster or a contingency plan could be about. Those could be, of course, foodborne outbreaks, certain recalls. Maybe you have issues within your plant like ammonia leaks or fires or some sabotage of the building, or maybe there's a media crisis that is kicked off for your company. Of course, natural disasters such as hurricanes and tornadoes and things can impact operations. Regulatory actions against the plant, could be a source of for a contingency plan. Cyber attacks that deny systems, and really so many more. Those are a wide variety of different types of topics, and really the responses to these, of course, are going to be different. I want to say, though, and make the point, though, that the preparation for these, there's a lot of similarities in how you can prepare for those. And really one of the basis for that kind of comment is that really a lot of what you talk about, how you create your disaster plan, begins with a risk assessment, trying to identify what those particular risks are. You know, for example, there could be geographic risks for you. Do you live in an area that's prone to hurricanes or tornadoes, heavy blizzards, and those types of things? They may offer some specific risks for a location that maybe others don't have to worry about. It's risk. Do you have a product that's susceptible to food safety concerns that need to be managed? So anyway, the risk assessment begins with that. I would say as we are focusing our discussion that we're going to focus on those things that are really more operations focused, which is in the title, meaning not like the media type of incidences. And when you boil down those wide variety of different things that could occur, um, frankly, it really kind of boils down in my mind into two really kind of main buckets. A food safety incident, foodborne outbreak in particular is what we're talking about, or some type of disruption to the operations within the plant. So those are kind of where we're going to end up focusing a little bit more. Now, I just talked in very broad general terms about a risk assessment. You can go out into the internet and find a wide variety of resources that will help you do risk assessments for disaster preparedness. Certainly would suggest that you leverage those, work with trade groups that can be experts and help you with those, or federal organizations. For example, the USDA has this whole food emergency response plan template that's available out there. So there are resources to reach out to for more details than what we're going to cover here. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the preparation side of things, because this is kind of where I was saying there are some things that we can prepare for, and a lot of it can be similar to each other, even though there's a wide variety of disasters that you would need to plan for. So these planning for these standard actions, that is really what I'm kind of getting at. The event that occurs, whatever that event is, there's probably some similar initial actions that you always want to end up taking. There is going to be, for example, the different people within the plant and with the company, these roles and responsibilities, for instance, should be outlined of who's involved early on in any type of issue. This also could include state and local agencies too, right? If there's chemical spills or fires and those types of things, those agencies need to be identified and engaged, and that can all be done and should be done ahead of time instead of trying to figure that out, of course, during the crisis. Which also then it kind of alludes to is that a lot of the standard actions begins with a communication plan. How does whatever issue that you're dealing with, how does that communication plan initially get activated? What's the triggers to say, oh, this is a big event that we need to engage a broader team on? And then, of course, during the crisis that is occurring, there's going to be a communication plan that you can figure out ahead of time how that will work. So that's kind of what I'm getting at, is that there are some standard actions that you can plan for, that you can put into the plan. Give that thought ahead of time when you've got the reasonable time to think about it, figure it out, and detail out so that people know what the initial actions are that are dealing with the issue. Of course, whatever plan you come up, do want to make sure that you test that, make sure that your communications plans work, and that you're probably going to have times where you need to improve it. So there should be continuous improvement of these plans over time as you learn more and your plant and your company learns more. There certainly is to be room for improvement. So please keep on improving those also. Now, I was talking pretty broadly here to kind of talk a little bit about, a little bit more specifics about what are some of the standard actions that can be planned for in your disaster plan. I want to use an example, and I will use a food safety incident first. And this is really kind of geared towards what I would think would probably be the most common type of issue that you would experience. There certainly are issues that occur, with fires and ammonia leaks and other unfortunate things that occur. But a food safety incident, frankly, in my career, my 29 years, I've had more of those instances that I've dealt with versus the others. So here's our example. What are the things that we can plan for in a food safety incident? And a lot of that should rotate around the initial reaction. If you got notification of a foodborne outbreak or some type of other thing, like a positive pathogen test in some product, your first steps is to really kind of get things under control, meaning get your hands around all the possible product. I would advise or suggest that you don't be shy about putting product on hold, uh, because we see in the news that sometimes recalls get expanded. And I would certainly offer up the idea that one recall is better than two. So, don't be shy about getting your hands around the product. But again, then once you get the hands around the product, there should be some alert process. The folks in the plant are probably initially the ones that are reacting to it. Who are the leadership folks in the plant? They're getting notified, and then who is getting notified outside of the plant and the corporate offices to really kind of activate the overall disaster plan. Of course, the plant teams all teams should be cross-functional. The plant team, of course, will have plant management involved. Quality will probably be involved. Sanitation, operations, purchasing will be involved. HR, all those different departments are all going to be engaged with an issue. So they should have then the plan, who's getting notified when and how. And of course, corporate teams will need to be activated also. Those teams are probably tailored to the type of issue that's involved with it, whether it's a food safety and quality type person and sanitation, those will go hand in hand. But what I'm getting at is that there might be some technical experts that get activated, and from the corporate side, maybe if it's a micro issue, of course, it'll be more microbiologists that get involved, but maybe it's an allergen issue, so maybe toxicologists will be involved. Generally legal will be involved, and of course your PR group, your communications group will get involved also. So anyway, have plans for who gets activated and when. And then of course, once everything is brought into control, meaning getting your hands around everything, then investigations should start after that. Some of the other additional things that you can plan for in the disaster plan would be have the initial kind of thoughts around or direct that determination of the root cause to help folks understand that this will be a very extensive, in-depth types of investigation that could involve outside folks to help give their experts, and talents to the investigation. It also involve verifying that all product has been that isn't implicated is on hold. And that's usually done through sampling and traceability type of actions. But again, some of those steps need to be defined in the plan so that they can be focused on in the heat of the moment. Of course, there will always be in a food safety incident like this some type of restoration of sanitary conditions. However, the area or equipment or room or whatever is implicated gets decontaminated. How does that occur? And frankly, there's going to be disposal of product. Think about that as the plan. How does that occur? Who do you engage with destroying the product, and how is that going to end up being managed? A very critical part to that if it needs to be done correctly. I did have in my past sitting with some friends had an opportunity to have some folks bring out some product that they got from a flea market that ended up being that was a product that was involved in a recall. They got it essentially out of the dump intact in boxes. So that and that certainly you don't want to have people grabbing it out of dumps and then going and selling them in flea markets and those types of things. So the disposal of your implicated product, does take some thought and prior planning. Now, the communication plan, initially we were talking about on the activation of the of the event did not really include the other folks that need to be communicated to, after things are brought under control, and that's employees need to know what's going on. Your customers, of course, need to know what's going on because there's going to be some disruption there. And the regulators, FDA or USDA, is going to be involved. They may have kicked off the incident or maybe not, but in either case, there's going to be ongoing communication with those. So plan ahead for that. And really, of course, the overall goal is, you're trying to mitigate any damage to your brand's reputation. And just want to put in the plug that being open and heartfelt statements, about the issue, I think goes a long way with customers. Evasion and not really being open about stuff, I think, breeds distrust. So when you talk about your communication plan, think about your reputation as a company because it's at risk at the moment with the food safety incident, and how you approach it is going to be very, very important. So just as a tip, as part of the communication plan, that needs to be part of that. There's another example, disruption of the operations, right? There's two main buckets I talked about, food safety incident, and then the other one was something that's going to disrupt the plant's operations. Those are usually types of events like fires or ammonia leaks or something more dramatic. In that case, that is going to stop the plant operations. Of course, your initial reaction there should then be focused on making sure all the employees get home safely. Now, once that is done and say fire or something else is under control, again, the assessment of the damage and stuff will occur, of course, but you also have a whole bunch of raw materials that need to be evaluated. Plant, if it's going to be down for a while, which likely will be, or at least part of it, there's a bunch of raw materials that you have en route in the supply chain that need to be stopped or managed or diverted. And all that can be initially part of the plan about how that's going to occur. I would also say that the initial reaction in these types of disruptions, in particular, really are determined by your culture that's in your plant. Meaning, is it an organized action or is it a little bit chaotic? How your operations run on a normal basis. If it's a well-tuned, finely oiled machine, your reactions usually are going to be in control and calm. So always work on culture as part of your responses to make sure that things go smoothly. Of course, then there'll be a determination of how long this disruption will occur, and of course that could roll into longer duration disruptions. Could detail employee retention issues, maybe production at different locations, an assistant planner or co-man, but those are the ones that you can't necessarily kind of plan for, but those should be mentioned in the plan that those could be considerations. So at least that sparks discussion around those. So anyway, those are some of the examples. With that, it's harder to get in the disruption of operations if there's preventative measures that will be available that can be planned for based upon the type of issue. If it's more internally based, like a fire, of course, maybe there was something internally that didn't work that could be then, identified as a root cause. Other disruptions of operations, like a hurricane, of course, that can't really be prevented. But there might be that. So that should be part of the plan to make sure we look for those. And of course, that communication plan, after the incident needs to go through, through everybody, including the supply chain. So anyway, just some examples of some of those areas to where you can put into the plan and think ahead a little bit about what your actions are going to be. So let's roll then into, I guess, the prevention side of it. Okay. Because the best disaster is the one that you avoid, right? So let's try and see how we can avoid that disaster to begin with. And the points I want to make around here is that preventing these types of disasters and issues, frankly, it's that work that you're doing all year long. It's having good, strong programs and operations, and really, frankly, the culture of your facilities. If that is good and strong, you're less likely to have problems. If so, that is prevention, then is working on doing what you're doing every day, having good, strong programs and a good culture of whatever it is that, whatever area you're talking about. For example, each functional area within a facility, whether it's personal safety, food safety, quality, sanitation, the utility departments, security, IT, etc., all those different functions within a facility have standards, have audit schemes, have regulations, whether federal, state, or local. Do you meet those? Right? Meeting those regulations is the minimal expectation. So is the minimum good enough for you? Or maybe do you need to go beyond that? You got to know in those different areas what good looks like. So leverage that work in your everyday year-long work process to make those things better and continuously improve them. And then your risks and will go down and you'll be able to prevent those types of issues. So for example, so what am I kind of getting at there? What does good look like? And we're going to again use a food safety example because it's very common, of course, in the news here of late. And I want to talk a little bit then about, as your example, how do you control the foodborne pathogens? Now, in my company of commercial food sanitation, when we are providing this type of help, we focus on these areas in these 5 buckets. This is your example of what is your year-long work should be looking like to have good, strong programs and a good culture of hygienic control. Because if you do well in all these different areas of hygienic zoning, good manufacturing practices and their execution, got a good environmental monitoring program, good sanitation programs and their execution, and you've got good hygienic design and a good relationship with maintenance and sanitation. If those things are all working well, you probably have control of pathogens within your facility. If you have a pathogen concern in your facility, I would bet you one or more of these buckets, has some issues with it. So what do I mean by that as far as what good everyday work looks like? Let's look at each bucket in a little bit more detail about kind of what I mean about doing that diligence every day. So like in hygienic zoning, for example, that would be for pathogen control, we should separate raw areas from ready to eat areas. There should be microbial barriers or hurdles in place between where those different zones transition to reduce the risk of cross contamination. Those hurdles should be there and maintained 24 hours a day, all the time. Bacterial contamination doesn't stop during the sanitation shift. So they need to be maintained all through production and through sanitation. And frankly, there should be a backup system in place while they're being actively cleaned. Mobile equipment that's going from one zone to the next, well, one, shouldn't happen. You should dedicate those if you can. And then if you can't, how do you reduce the risk with those and clean them up? Is your environmental air filtered? Is it conditioned and dehumidified? Is it positively pressured and ready to eat? And a whole bunch of other things could roll into hygienic zoning, like, the separation of tools. Do you wear captive footwear, signage, and making sure your employees understand, and a whole bunch more things. But those are the examples of those basics that help in that particular bucket. GMPs is pretty much what you would think. I would say that the plants that are more successful with good manufacturing practices have designed the plant to make it easier for employees to do the right thing. Right. For example, like in the entranceways into production, your GMP entrance, have you designed that so that the sequence that you want them to gear up and wash their hands and sanitize their shoes, is that process set up so that they go through it one step at a time in the order that you want? Or is it just one big open room that they can then go and do what they want? We should control that and make it so that they have the best chance to do it in order. Another example would be the location of hand wash stations and sanitizing stations on the plant floor. If employees get their hands contaminated, do they have to leave the line and go across the room to wash their hands, or can they just very quickly jump off the line and get to a sink that's really nearby, or a sanitizer bottle that's right there for them to just turn and use? We can set them up for success through good design. Other things that are part of GMPs that should be considered would be good control programs on allergens, foreign material controls, pest control type things. There should be ongoing inspections for GMPs to make sure that our employees are performing those well. What does housekeeping look like in a plant? If you got good housekeeping in the plant, that's a sign of a good culture, good hygienic culture. You're not going to go into a plant and say, boy, that operation is running great and have a whole bunch of product on the floor and those types of things. But if it's kept up well and good housekeeping, there's that sign that the well-organized process. And of course, other things are GMP related, pallets and cardboard and ready to eat areas, how compressed air is used, how they deal with WIP product, those types of things, those types of examples. We keep rolling. Pathogen environmental monitoring. A good program, let's be honest, if you have a pathogen in your plant, someone's going to find it. You know, that person that's going to find it is either going to be your customer because they're going to get sick. It's going to be a regulator when they do a swabathon, or it should be the plant that finds it. If you have a good, aggressive environmental monitoring program so that the plant can find their pathogens and you can react to those on your terms and then eliminate them. So to have a good pathogen environmental monitoring program, it needs to be designed well to incentivize finding it, want it to be aggressive, and people need to know what to look for, which means good swab site management and review, sites being selected that is the worst case scenario, meaning the hardest areas to reach and clean is probably where you should be swabbing. And swabbing technique needs to be aggressive to get that bacteria to release from the surfaces and get onto the sampling sponge. And of course, the corrective and preventative action process in response to suspects or positives should then also be very aggressive and robust. Sanitation. Sanitation is a process, just like operations is a process. There's the 7 steps of sanitation that we advocate for and teach. And sanitation should be set up as a process and not just a chaotic event that occurs, you know, during the night or during the weekends. That process should be validated, just like cooking processes are validated. Should be a very structured event with everybody knowing what they're supposed to be doing, in what order they're supposed to be doing it, and they should be synchronized so that they're doing those things together. Kind of like that racing pit crew. That's the kind of mentality a sanitation crew should have so they don't contaminate each other's work. Of course, all processes are monitored with KPIs. Sanitation should also be monitored with KPIs. How long is the sanitation window? Are we getting the full window of cleaning opportunity, or is that being shortened because production is running over or something like that? How successful are we at sanitation? What's the pre-op success rate look like? What are the swab results showing you? Of course, there all should be procedures, should be very clear. There should be periodic cleaning tasks that should be robust. And of course, there should be other things to go in there with, like, you know, gap assessment of sanitation. How are sanitation tools stored? What's the training look like? How are parts handled? Et cetera, and et cetera. A lot bunch more that kind of goes into that. And then hygienic design. You know, a plant can be designed to be successful, or they can be designed to fail. And hygienic design helps you get to that point to where you design your operations for success. And you really should instill a culture of hygienic design within your facility so that when repairs are made, they're done with hygienic design in mind so that those repairs help the hygienic conditions of the plant and don't create niche problem areas. Of course, equipment selection is also part of the hygienic design process, and most hygienic design should be considered when selecting equipment. There also should be things like review processes, not just for new equipment, but for the equipment that you have. The legacy equipment that you have is providing hygienic design risk. So how do you improve that? What are the things that as a plant you can improve upon and repair and fix or remove? Replacing hollow rollers with solid ones, for example, or maybe there's piano hinges on cabinets that can be removed and replaced with sanitary hinges. Those smaller things like that can be done to improve your hygienic design situation and reduce risk. So it helps lend to the overall condition, what your infrastructure and equipment looks like. So this is kind of what I was alluding to here with that your everyday work. And in this case, we use that food safety example that everyday work in all these different areas, these 5 different buckets, help prepare you to reduce your risk of having a disaster, or in this case, a foodborne outbreak. And that's the kind of work you need to be working on all year long from the prevention standpoint. All right, let's talk a little bit about managing then the crisis itself. Um, it's um, it's pretty hard to talk about this because all those different situations have a little bit different type of response to them that we talked about in the beginning. So I'm just really going to make the point that the upfront preparation is really important for that. Each crisis is going to have a slightly different kind of response to it, and the manual that you make, will help you with that plan up front. And these previous examples and things should all be kind of part of that. I would say a couple of things that you want to make sure, though, that the overall plan you get trained in and that there's training for that. We had, for example, we had our disaster plans in one of my roles. We had a red binder sitting on the shelves. Actually, kind of important to have paper copies of it because if you're depending to have that in electronically and you have a disaster and you don't have power, you won't be able to get to it. So having a book copy, I think, is an important backup. But the time to pull out the book and figure out what you're going to do is not during the emergency. You should know without having to reference the book what you need to do. So there needs to be training to it and explanations for it up front, and you need to practice it. So it needs to be something that needs to be done. And we'll talk a little bit more about the practice of it and training to it and the lessons learned here about what I mean by some of those things. So all I want to kind of say about managing. Let's get more into the lessons learned because these are where some of the things in managing it that have come up over the years that I wanted to kind of share of kind of what I've learned on a couple of things here. So the first lesson learned really is that whatever the crisis is, especially if it's a food safety related thing, there's going to be denial that there's an issue. It's not a lab error. Hate to tell you that. That always comes up every time. That's the first question. Is it a lab error? It's not a lab error. You've got something going on that you were not aware of. So don't go down that road. You're going to waste time. You're going to waste effort. And then you're going to jeopardize the acceptance that we have an issue. So don't let the denial grab hold. Do lab errors occur? Of course, but you got a crisis going on. Don't go down that road. It's not a lab error. Frankly, every time that we've gone through type of foodborne issues and outbreaks, and there's lots of discussions about lab errors. And as we dig into it and do an investigation, there are tons of things that needed to be improved. So just go improve stuff and don't worry about any type of lab error. One of the other lessons learned that we went through was, talk about training. And the leaders know the plan. We've got the books in our offices, and we're the leaders, and we know what it is. Do your frontline leaders know it? Especially the third shift person. Every crisis in the plant and fire or ammonia leak seems to happen on third shift, right? When there's nobody else around. So does that person know the plan? And so we talk about training. It's not just the department heads that have these books and things, but does those frontline leaders also know what to do? And that includes those second level leaders that cover for them when they go on vacation. Because invariably the crisis is going to occur when your experienced shift manager is out on vacation and you've got people standing in for them, and they all need to know. And we've had some experiences of that you really do need to make sure everyone is properly trained and have a good training program for that so that everybody knows. That doesn't mean that they're going to run the whole show, right? The leaders in the plant and department heads will eventually get there and take over, but that initial response is going to be based upon those leaders and their culture. Another lesson learned that we had is that you really want to upfront develop relationships with your first responders. Um, the first time they go in the plant, you don't want it to be during the fire or the ammonia leak or whatever the crisis is that's going on. They need to know how to get in and where to go. And sometimes plants are really very confusing to get around in because there are different buildings that have been added onto, and they're not very easy to find their way. So develop your relationship with your first responders. We used to have an annual spaghetti dinner, and when the plant was down, like on a Sunday and the like, we'd have the whole community come. That was first responders. We talk about the plans and interactions, and we would train them on what to expect and the communication plans that we have with them. And then there would be tours. This is how you would get to these areas where the ammonia valves are, and some of the other fire suppression systems, those types of things. We want them to know and get familiar with the plant. So we get all garbed up and go out there and walk the plant so they can see these things. Strongly encourage you to do that. You develop a really good relationship with those first responders, and that only grows over the years. So please do that. When you practice, when we said practice, it's more than just evacuation drills in a plant. That's generally when we say practice, what everybody does first, and you need to do that so people are familiar with that, but leverage that event because it's an expensive event, right? You're shutting down the plant and evacuating. That's going to cost money. So get the most out of that downtime that you're taking to get the full benefit of that drill. So it's just not, hey, did everybody get out and get to the right evacuation and head counting spot? What was the communication like? Do you have the department head of operations running the show, or do you let some of these second level leaders and supervisors run the show so they can get the more experience with that? We did that. We had our leaders looking over the shoulders of everybody, but we let some of the second level leaders kind of run the show so that they can get a feel for it before the crisis occurs. And it really gave them a lot of confidence that we did end up having an issue that they would be able to kind of handle that. We also used the drills to coordinate with first responders, and they were part of the drills. We had to coordinate that ahead of time, and they had to be taken off the network to do it, but they were there so that when we had the drills for a fire or an ammonia leak or something like that, they did their part and got into the parts of the plant that they could get into. We were still running products, so they couldn't get into all of it, but there's parts that they could get into. So anyway, leverage the drills as much as possible to give everybody that opportunity to learn from it. And then be very clear on who the incident leader is at the time. There will be handoffs during a crisis. Your frontline leader is going to be there first. They'll be on the radios directing things, and then somebody's going to come that's going to be more senior with more experience that will take control. Make sure that everybody who's on the radios, who's working the event, knows that there's a very clear and distinct leadership handover at that particular point to avoid confusion. Chaos and confusion and communication is the biggest threat. So make sure that that's very clear during those crises. Other lessons learned from the food safety aspect of it, hold and release, of course, is going to be very critical. Sometimes those second recalls are because of a hold and release problem. Not necessarily just because the scope increased, but something got out. So just make sure that, hey, you're in a crisis mode. That means that product that you have on hold should be looked at and touched every day. And that somebody needs to own it. There's lots of different people that touch hold and release product. One person needs to own that and control that. It doesn't mean they do all the work, but they do need to own it so that you have a better chance of knowing if something is going wrong. And don't trust, I guess, that everybody knows what to do. If you have product out in DCs and other areas that people who are familiar, that are not that familiar with these food safety type issues, their focus and their roles may be on getting product out the door on full pallets of product. And, we've had experiences with people pulling stuff off held product because they needed it to fill the order. So think ahead about that. Their intentions were not about food safety. Their intentions was to fill the order, and realize that some people's view is going to be limited to that. So do things like lock it away in cages. We actually, when we had bigger issues, we put up chain link fencing, rolls of chain link fence, and attached it to pillars, support pillars within the building to create a cage that we would put all the product in, and we would lock it, and then quality and food safety had the key. So, you can do those types of things to make sure you keep it all under control for those bigger incidences. So don't be afraid to do that. And of course, then one of the last things to talk about really is a root cause identification. Keep digging for a true root cause. Many times the initial feelings are really symptomatic and not really what the root cause are. And there really cannot be enough diligence around digging at root causes to really kind of understand that. Hey, you know what? You may never get to a true root cause sometimes, but the more you dig, the better chance you have of getting to that root cause, and then you can prevent it from happening again. Um, but most of the time, when we're getting involved in helping, that root cause is really digging a little bit deeper than what has been done already. So keep digging. Now, one last thing, I guess, when we kind of think about all these different kind of disasters and foodborne outbreaks and those types of things, last point I really kind of want to make is that you got to realize that, hey, you just went through a disaster or some type of contingency plan. Something didn't work. Something's broken, whether it's a food safety issue or fire suppression, something went wrong. So something needs to then change so it doesn't happen again. Sometimes, like with foodborne outbreaks and things, it's a multitude of different systems and stuff that have failed, which means that, you know what, you may need a big change. You may have to look at a culture change within your company to be able to do that, because business can't be as usual. You can't just do minor tweaks around a foodborne outbreak and think you're going to be okay. It's much bigger than that. And there's usually cultural issues that need to be addressed. So don't be afraid to look in the mirror and realize it may start at the top, and that some company structures may need to change. But there's usually a cultural type of basis for the failures that occurred. So it's a lot easier, not easier, definitely not easy. I think the wrong. It's better if you go big on those changes and realize that, hey, something didn't work, we failed at it, and we got to fix it. And there's definitely a time to go big or go home. So with that, those are my thoughts around the topic today, and I'll be very interested in any questions.
Well, Dan, thank you very much. I really appreciated the fact that you kept it, I guess, applicable to all the different types of scenarios, despite the fact that obviously your background and sort of maybe you could argue the scope of this was, centered on food safety, right? There are other
Mhm.
disasters that can hit. It's almost, it's an entire field of study on its own.
Yeah.
I've got a few questions, and I guess the first one I have is looking at the planning first, right? So you mentioned in the slide that there is a template that the USDA
Mhm.
has.
Yeah.
But if I'm sitting out there in the audience and I'm like, I don't know if our company has one of these, or I think the one we have sucks.
Mhm.
Um, are there is it Do groups like CFS help to advise and consult on putting together a world-class plan for that? And like, are there resources available
Yeah.
typically to help a group that doesn't even know where to start?
Yeah. So, very good question. So there are resources available out there. So let me explain that a little bit more. So first of all, like companies like for us, we're focused on food safety, sanitation, hygienic design. We're going to help you deal with the root causes of types of issues. Um, we're not really going to come in and help you make a disaster plan because there's others out there that'll do that for you. I'm trying to point you to some of the trade associations, some of the regulators. The USDA was the example I gave, but I believe the FDA also has one. The trade groups have those groups, and there's also consultants that's what they do. And I would steer you towards those experts. That there are consultants out there to help you do those contingency plans and disaster planning for that. So there are experts out there to leverage for help.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Next question, when we talk about practicing, right? So I think it's probably pretty common, and I'm sure people out there have experienced this as well, where there's a plan, maybe once a year you sit around a table and do a page flip, but you're not drilling it.
Right.
And I imagine that there's a lot of reasons why it's hard to coordinate. It's expensive to have folks not making product during that time, but it is a plant-wide activity, really. So do you have any thoughts or I guess best practices or suggestions for folks who are like, yeah, we've got a plan in the door, it was in the drawer, it was kind of pencil whipped. We need to really start working on drilling it to see if it works and kind of poke holes in it to make sure it's actually going to help us in a crisis. Any thoughts on like recommendations for how to get something that started, how to get like a drill or like a practice session started?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Good question. I guess first couple thoughts. So one, you kind of alluded to it, Brian, that the initial training typically is, hey, here's the book, and we flip through the pages, and this is what that means. That's just the first step of training to understand it. You really got to train to the level of understanding. So it's usually more than just once a year you're going to flip through the book and do a half-hour presentation on disasters. The folks involved really need to understand what those plans actually mean. Usually, when it comes down to it and actually like simulating it, is where a lot of the questions will come up. So, like for example, we're talking food safety. For example, there's going to end up, let's say, you get a contact from your FDA or USDA saying that there's an illness that's been tied to you. So the disaster plan say you're going to go call somebody, and hopefully the plan will have the details of who and numbers and those types of things. Are those accurate? And really, does the person, the supervisor who's on the shift at the time, know what to do and who to call and how to end up doing that? So getting down to that level of details and the practice then and the training is going to be important. So don't just train the plant leaders in what the book is. There should also be additional training and page flipping in more details than with the frontline leaders that also need to end up knowing this. There should be everybody together in there. And then when you do the drills, you start it as it would occur. So if there is a drill, for a fire, and you're going to practice your evacuation drills, okay, well, how is that going to manifest itself? Right? It's going to be a random event somewhere in the plant that a fire is going to start. So have the person, the leader, maybe the safety person in the plant, manager, go out into the plant and just not randomly select, but maybe selected a spot in the plant that they're going to go and tell an employee or somebody else, oh, there's a fire, we're doing just a drill, but we're starting to drill that there's a fire in this room. What are you going to do? And make those people go through it right from the beginning to have a very engaging kind of drill instead of just hit the alarm and watch people walk out. So I'm trying to, I guess, encourage you to make it as realistic as possible so those expensive events can get the most learning from it. That also then goes, I've kind of alluded to it already, that during the drills, don't have the plant manager leading the show. They've done it many times already through the drills. Have that second shift, business unit leader or somebody else who is that going to be there alone on that shift lead it. And yeah, the plant manager or operations manager or whoever can be looking over their shoulder to make sure they're doing well, but let them use that time to train those others. And frankly, it's not just always operations who are leading there. Well, what's the quality supervisors doing, right? Quality managers and those other functions, safety managers, what are they doing? And could they be the source of the site leadership at the time? it kind of scares you a little bit. Well, not scares you. I would put it that way. Makes you laugh a little bit when you tease your HR manager who has weekend shift duty, who's in charge of the plant on the weekend. It's all right, HR manager, you're going to run this evacuation drill because on the weekend that you're having your duty, maybe you are the one who's there and is the senior leader. So having those different functions that don't normally do those types of drills would also be beneficial, to have them. So just get as much as you can out of those expensive drills.
Yeah, and I think one thing I've observed too, and in my experience with it in as lengthy as years, is that a lot of times folks understand in the abstract what the plan is, but they don't know what their role is in it. And I think maybe I just
Mhm.
want to reiterate that it's super important to keep contacts and that sort of work breakdown or that roles and responsibilities for these different crises, keep that easily accessible and keep it updated, right? I
Mhm.
think with that, talking about ownership of these different tasks during a crisis, someone has to also own the plan and make sure the plan itself is being updated, right? Because like you said, it's if everyone owns it, no one owns it. So
Mhm.
there's someone has to be in someone's purview to say you're in charge of making sure this is updated when people leave and people come in, people change jobs and you change the names in there. But it's a challenge. But
It
I've
is.
seen that fall down before too, where it's like, well, let's flip it open. Oops, everyone on this list is quit, or it's been
Yeah,
10 years old,
exactly.
so
Yeah.
and that's useless. So I think obviously more attention is good, and a lot of that comes with kind of that culture piece you talked about.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, that's a
Another,
good point. That whole change management piece of things is really important. Frankly, the manual that I've had it was changed a couple times a year. That would be a good expectation versus seeing it change once every 3 years or something like
yeah,
that. For
I was gonna ask too if there was a kind of a preferred, cadence for updating these things. One of the other questions that came in was, I think in the original topic blurb for this session, it talked a little bit about leveraging, technology. I guess, do you have any thoughts on how, in this day and age with AI and kind of cloud computing, a lot of computing power and just additional smart factories out there, have you seen any good examples of technology being used for either planning, prevention, or management of a crisis?
yeah.
Um,
Well, that's an exciting new area. I have not, I guess, from experience wise, kind of seen that yet. The my thoughts there are as we go to these smart facilities, right? That are going to leverage AI to be more predictive. That we should have fewer incidents because you're going to reduce your risk if you can be more predictive in failures of equipment. Um, those failures then obviously should not happen, which then a lot of times would create the risk that generates these types of big issues. Whether it's maintenance of stokers for smoke flavor and meats, or whether it's other like large motor failures and bearing failures or something, who knows what, generates like fires and things. But the more predictive, equipment maintenance and stuff can be to keep the plant up and running and in good shape, the risk should go down. So as we transition to smarter facilities with the use of AI and these other technologies, I just think our overall risk could be reduced. I think that's a really good thing.
Excellent. Well, I wanted to see if there's any other questions out there. If folks are still out there and have maybe something, doesn't have to be, brilliantly thought provoking, something specific to you that we can help with. Now's the time. We got a few more minutes. I guess I would ask as well. Back to what we talked about with drilling and training, right? You mentioned how practicing and all that stuff is obviously paramount, but as far as a training program, right? Like, are we talking about I don't know. I feel like they're different things, right? Training versus like that the practicing and the kind of almost
Mhm.
continuous improvement feed. But let's say you've got a new employee on the floor doesn't know anything about this, and they just started. It's their first day or their first week. Is the recommendation that this be a module that they have to review as part of their
Mhm.
onboarding? And then is there quizzes? Like I don't know. I mean, obviously training's a whole field of
Mhm.
study, it's a whole
Yeah.
function within a plant, but I'm just worried about like from like the classroom training aspect of this. Is there anything that you could add that maybe um might help or anything you've seen work really well?
Yeah. I, I guess some thoughts on training. It's going to be tailored for, the different individuals. The individual who's, like working on the line is going to have different training than the person who's supervising all of them, right? And there could be overlap there. I'm a fan of more training, the better. Um, but if you think about our frontline workers, they need to feel comfortable and feel that they've got the backing of the plant and leadership in the plant, that if there's something that's going on, that they can alert it, they can stop the line, alert that there is, whether it's a smell of ammonia or there's sparks or something like that, some of those early indicators of problems. They need to feel comfortable, and this is part of the cultural thing. They need to feel comfortable. Say, hey, something's going on. You need to stop and investigate before it becomes a crisis. Of course, then from the other training is that once it's in crisis mode and there's an evacuation order, those are the things we typically train to. This is what you do. This is your evacuation route. Um, I do like making sure in the training that we are making it again as realistic as possible. For example, the evacuation routes. Can you find the evacuation routes in the limited lighting that will be there if the power goes out? Some of the large, failures in the equipment or that could lead to fires or something else could also take out the power. And yes, there's emergency lighting, which is pretty minimal. Do we even know what that looks like? And can you really
Hmm.
get out in all different spots? I think in training, having some experiences with that, would be good. I do think that that can be found out ahead of time prior to training, because there are power failures that occur in plants without a crisis, throughout the year. So I think people get experience with that. But those frontline workers need to know a little bit more in reality what it will be like in a crisis. So
Thank you. That's
yeah.
excellent. Well, we're about out of time. I was going to ask if you had any advice on how to transform a company's culture, but that's not a 1 minute answer. So,
Nope.
I think I think a lot of what we're talking about here is the right company culture that values this kind of thing, that empowers the employees to again raise their hand when something comes up, to be that first responder, and if they don't know their role, to ask before it becomes a life or death situation. So.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, Dan, I want to thank you again for your time. I think this was excellent. Hopefully, everyone enjoyed it and got something out of it. I do want to remind everyone that these webinars will be available on YouTube, on the FPSA's YouTube channel. So I don't know the timing of that exactly, but I'm guessing it's not going to be very long. So with that, please reach out to any of us if you have any questions at all. And quick plug, or if you're interested in this type of content or type of discussion, reach out to me and ask about the food safety network within FPSA. So with that, I think we're going to shut her down. Thanks again for joining. Dan, thank you again. And
Thank you.
everyone have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.